My name is Sarah Caper with Forward Pinellas, and we are working on the downtown St. Petersburg mobility study in partnership with the City of St. Petersburg and the Florida Department of Transportation. We're also working closely with PSTA and with Pinellas County on this project. This morning, we'll do a brief overview of the study. The majority of our time will be spent in breakout rooms with some questions that we have for you on your thoughts and things you'd like us to consider with the study. And then we'll come back together to discuss next steps and some additional thoughts. This is a look at our study area. We have two pieces of the study. One are the corridors that we're focusing on and the areas in downtown, but we're also interested in a greater area for modeling purposes and to make sure that we're not missing anything in the larger downtown area. As part of the study, we are defining a vision for multimodal mobility in the greater downtown area. We're going to be testing different improvement strategies against performance measures that relate to mobility, livability, and economic vitality. And then ultimately, we're identifying projects and programs to advance. One thing I do want to mention, we'll provide some of this background context for you first and then go to the breakout rooms. If you have any questions on the content, please feel free to put that in the chat. We'll address that when we get a chance. But if you have thoughts or reactions to anything we're talking about, please save those for the breakout room discussion. So early in our study, which began last year, we started with thinking about our vision. We did outreach. We spoke to people about what is our vision for the greater downtown area. And we heard these 5 things that it relates to safety, accessibility, multimodal, connected, and vibrant. And so these are things that we're keeping in mind throughout the study as we think about projects and programs, which will ultimately put it into an action plan to advance. We started with looking at some current conditions. We wanted to see how people are traveling to the downtown area and around downtown. We used a tool called Streetlight Data to help us understand travel a little bit better. It's an aggregated Bluetooth source, so we can't tell individuals and how they travel, but we can see how people are getting from certain areas in and out of downtown and where they're coming from. One of the things we found interesting is that a lot of people are entering downtown not with the interstate system. So only 38% of regional trips are entering or leaving on 275, whether that's from 375, 175, or Fifth Avenue North. And that many of the people who live or work in downtown are coming from less than 10 miles away, kind of in both directions. So it's interesting to help us understand a little bit more of the needs of commuters, both the people living and working in downtown. We also looked at some demographic information. Here's one example of something we found and that I thought was very interesting, and it helps us understand the needs of the residents better. And that's 21% of downtown St. Pete households do not have access to a car, which tells us that we have to make sure we have quality non-auto options for people. We also looked at the roadway capacity of both 375 and 175, and they're largely unused. Even during peak times, we were able to do an analysis and find that they're really never being used more than 41% of capacity at a time. Another piece we looked at are the crash conditions, and this helps us understand safety areas of concern. We found that most of the crashes, considering how limited they are on the streetway network, are happening on the one-way pairs. 43% of all crashes are happening on the one-way pairs, which is less than 20% of the street network in this area. So they're very overrepresented in these crashes. And more than half of the crashes are happening on streets with 35-mile-per-hour speed limits, even though that's less than a quarter of the street network. And so this gives us an area that we can address from a safety perspective. And we're also looking especially at the crashes that result in a fatality or an incapacitating injury, because those are really the worst of the crashes from our perspective that need to be addressed. As part of our study, we have 4 focus areas. The first is to look at the one-way pairs and if there are opportunities to convert them to two-way. And we'll get into why you might want to do that in just a moment. We're also looking at, can we make changes to the interstate spurs to I-175 and I-375 to help mobility for the communities near downtown, and if there are other changes that make sense related to that. We're looking at other bike, ped, and transit projects that might be able to help improve mobility or get people to existing transit networks. And then finally, other safety and mobility enhancements that we might want to consider. As part of our effort, we're right now thinking about the projects to include, and we're going to put them into different scenarios, run those scenarios through our model. Our model looks at socioeconomic data through 2045. So we account for the increased growth happening at the Tropicana Field site and other development happening in and around downtown, as well as projects that we know are planned or programmed between now and then. So we'll look at these additional projects, we'll put them into different scenarios. What if we do this or that? We'll have different performance measures to evaluate them, and then ultimately develop an action plan with a list of projects, programs, and next steps. And the performance measures that we're looking at will all relate back to that vision. So they'll focus on safety, vibrant and livable, accessible and connected, and multimodal to make sure we tie back to what we heard people say is important to the downtown area. So a little bit of information on what some of the changes could look like and why we would consider them. When you think about conversion to two-way streets from one way, and a lot of people are familiar with this from what's happened in downtown, two-way streets give you an opportunity for some increased safety. You can reduce crashes. People will drive closer to the speed limit depending on how you do the street, which is more livable. It also means that if we do have crashes, they're less likely to be severe. There are also safety benefits and just livable benefits from having people drive the speed limit and not so fast. It also helps businesses with increased visibility. We found in research of previous conversions, decreased vacancy rates, and also more direct access to your destination. And if you think about it, if you're driving on a one-way street in an area you're not familiar with, you might have people turn the wrong way or get turned around and not figure out how to get to where they're actually going. And so this is one way to increase the ease of navigation in the downtown. As part of our effort, these are some of the one-way pairs we're looking at. We are not looking at making changes to First Avenues North and South. With the Sunrunner coming in and the projects happening with that, we didn't want to look at any additional changes at this time, but we have been considering, should we make changes to convert one-way pairs, 3rd and 4th Street, 8th and MLK, or 5th Avenues North and South into two-way operations, and what that might look like. Regarding the interstate spur modifications, if we want to make changes to 175 or 375, there are many different things we could look at. We could look at changing one of them, changing both of them. We could look at modifying them, completely removing them, or removing them partway. There are also options for potentially making it over or under. This is an example from Rochester, New York. They are already doing this with a highway that ran through their downtown area. And you can see in the picture here, this is the same building. And the building has the interstate next to it. Then it's in the middle picture under construction. And then in this picture, there's actually a new building where the interstate was. And you can see the bike facilities that are right here next to it. A lot of communities right now are looking at this in the United States. A lot of highways have a major equity impact on communities and neighborhoods. And so it is a very important consideration that a lot of the US is talking about right now. And if you remove a highway, you do have opportunity to transform, like they did in Rochester, that underutilized land. You can increase connectivity to a neighborhood. And depending on how you do whatever changes you do, you can reduce the heat island effect and air pollution through adding green space. And this image shows you that same Rochester example and how much space is actually taken up by the highway that they are removing. And the building from before is over here towards the back right of the image. So as part of our study, we've started to think about what this could look like in the downtown area. And these are just some ideas for consideration. We're open to your thoughts and we'll ask you some questions related to that when we get to the breakout rooms. If you look at the top left, this is 375. And in this image, we are removing 375 as part of our consideration and reconnecting it with these red lines. The dark gray is what's being removed. And then we add new streets where 375 was. We also do two-way streets for the rest of the area with 4th and 5th Avenues. The image on the bottom shows a partial removal. So if we were to pull 375, this one, the red is the removal. This dark gray is where it reconnects. And then we have the new streets over here and the additional two-way streets. When we look at 175, the top right, this first one is also a removal redesign option. So the red is the reconnection. We have the green that are the new streets. We do have streets going through the Tropicana Field site. These aren't necessarily the streets that will be the final ones, but for the modeling purposes, it's very important to show that there is connectivity on the site. So it's not as important as to where exactly the streets are as that the streets exist, and that helps us understand the connectivity. And then they go through to the street network that already exists. We have some new streets here as well. And then we're looking at converting one-way to two-way and adding two-way options in this particular scenario or option. The bottom one, like 375, shows a partial removal of 175 and what that could look like. So the dark gray are these new connections back in. The red is removed in this instance, and you can show increased connectivity throughout the network. And these are just some of the ideas we're considering and we'd like to hear your feedback on in the breakout rooms. We're also looking at making multimodal improvements and thinking about how those might look and why you might want to do them. Some of these have already happened through the Complete Streets work that the city has done, but thinking about why we might want to improve multimodal access to transit, to bicycle and pedestrian facilities, or changing the road network. And there are opportunities for economic impact with walking and higher property values. The cost savings of having quality public transportation and other options is significant. And we saw from the socioeconomic data, it's important to have quality options for the people who don't have cars or who don't want to have a car. The health that's associated with increased activity, if you're active and moving, you reduce your risk of death. Equity, the importance of having choice and options for our community. The economic impact of public transportation is significant, and then also the environmental considerations. And you can see on this slide here some of what St. Pete's already doing with their health and all policies on the right, with the Complete Streets implementation plan. And then in the middle here are two different images of what some of the multimodal improvements could look like. For example, you have a protected intersection on the top, and at the bottom, you extend the curb out so that people who are walking have less space to walk, so there increases their safety while they're moving. One of the other things we're going to be asking for your feedback on later is the performance measures. Here's a list of some of the things we've already been considering. We do have a couple others, but these are the major ones. So one, addressing crash hotspots through safety. Another is looking at opportunities for new development in public space. Increased opportunities for active transportation and public transit and accessing them, as well as access to the Sunrunner service with that coming on board, making sure people can get there. We're looking at roadway utilization and intersection performance. This relates back to the modeling that we're doing and ensuring that we're looking at the congestion or backup or delay that might be happening as a result of changes and where that is happening, and making sure that people understand what that could look like. Another is connectivity between downtown St. Pete and adjacent neighborhoods, ensuring that the neighborhoods have access and seeing what kind of performance measures relate to that we can show people. Regional access to key destinations, some of the major attractions in downtown, seeing what impacts might happen there. And then one of the last performance measures we're looking at that is extremely important from what we've heard is emergency vehicle travel time, making sure that access to the hospitals and other emergency services is something that we're looking at and sharing information about. So with that, we will go to the breakout rooms in just a moment.